Yo, it's your friend Dinner Dog, and we talk about complexity in the randomizer a lot. And in this video, we're going to find out why. So, breaking it down here, we're going to look at why we care about complexity, some terms, how this confidence count thing works, how it impacts decision making, how we can use some notation to keep track of this stuff if we want to. And then I've done examples of every preset, and I've got some do-it-yourself tools that you'll find in the description. They're pretty cool. We'll look over them later. Now, if you're here because this stuff is interesting to you and you just want to listen to the sound of my voice, you're in. Good. If you're doing this because you're racing, but you haven't done all the 200 series yet, just get the hell out of here, right? You'll come back here later, right? And what I mean by that is my whole purpose here is to help you become faster. But if you're starting here, this isn't going to help you to be faster. You got to master the other fundamentals first for this to matter. So go back and do that. In particular, you need to have an extremely strong sense of logic for any of this to ever be able to work out. You need to be able to recall this on top of your head like immediately and do it fairly effortlessly. So whether that's through watching the previous video on logic or through just a lot of practice, definitely make sure you got a strong sense of logic before you even start worrying about complexity counting. And then obviously understand what complexity is. We're not going to be going through that concept again in this video. Okay, so why do we care about this stuff, right? And it's really because information is extremely limited when we play a randomizer, right? And that's kind of by design. So we really only know two things. We know logic because, we just know how these presets work. We know what it expects the player to be able to do, right? So we can infer some things from that. The other thing is complexity. We know what or how many like steps in the ladder or the chain that there are, and we can use that to our advantage potentially. We're not always going to be able to use it, and a lot of times it's just bad. But there are cases we can, and it saves a lot of time. So long and the short of it is, we don't really have other things to think about. We know logic, we can know complexity, and that's it. Everything else is random, right? So that being said, that's why it gets talked about a lot, even if it's something that isn't always going to be applicable. Okay, so let's take a look at some terms and such, okay? So when I talk about progression relics, we're talking about relics that generally increase your ability to progress in the game, right? We're also going to include progression items here. I'm just going to say them in the same breath. We're going to save each other some time, all right? So like all of these things in this chart here are progression relics. We're typically not going to worry too much about the power of items, all right? But sometimes they're required. The other piece of it, and I might as well just get out of the way right now, is that when we talk about progression relics, it's when it gives you progression. So like one ring does nothing for you. It will never do anything for you. It's always the second ring, right? We like having the first ring. We call it the Rando ring, but you never consider it progression until you have both, right? Whereas like Bat and Echo individually can be progression. The one ring will never be progression, all right? So like keep that in mind. So now that we understand what we talk about when we mention progression relics, there's a few counts here that generally matter. The first one is the hard count, and that is just the level we are on right now. So if we were to use this Donkey Kong example, when we get the holy glasses and now we're in the second castle, every other relic we grab will be on level 5, and we had the 4th level relic. The hard count is us knowing what this is. Now the problem, although the hard count is useful, is that's not really realistic to keep track of. Like even looking at this example here, there are 2 things on level 2, there's 1 thing on level 3, and then the rando ring might throw us for a loop there. There are multiple things on level 5, right? It could be very easy to mix all this up, especially if you go out of logic. So we like the hard count, but we typically don't specifically count it. I'm going to show you an easier way to get to the same number anyways, all right? So don't worry about it. The soft count is generally a number of progression relics that we have, or at least our best guess, right? We know it's not necessarily the best, but we're saying, okay, at least from a soft perspective, I think I'm at this, right? And that can have some benefits to it. In particular, like you can use it to definitely know you don't have enough progression to beat the game. And that can help you with some decision making things. All right. So We also, lastly, know minimum and maximum complexity. So this is never hidden from us, at least in the current version of the randomizer. There have been presets that have like a range of what the minimum can be, but I don't believe any of the current ones do. So looking at this, right? So the preset determines the absolute minimum in logic of the complexity levels, all right? We know this in advance. Lycanthrope, the minimum is 8. It doesn't change seed to seed unless there's an update to the randomizer. Conversely, because we know the minimum, we can also determine the maximum. And we can do that by just laying out all the progression relics as linearly as possible, right? We're not likely to get a seed with 10, but it is theoretically possible how I've laid it out here. And you'll notice that both of these relics are on the same level, because individually in this case, they can't be on, or like they can individually increase progression. Like if bat gives you a transformation, which I guess in this case it would have. Oh no, this is a lycanthrope example. That's right. We already start with wolf. Sorry. So bat will not give us a transformation because we have one. So at best, bat is going to give us flight. And flight was already solved for on level 3. So yeah, like getting the bat did nothing for us, but getting echo theoretically does, at least in logic. So we know what the minimum is, we know what the maximum is, all right? Now, theoretically, the higher the minimum complexity, the more likely it is that the minimum will be the first step. So with seeds that have a greater variance between minimum and maximum, you're more likely to get seeds that don't have the minimum, that go beyond it. But typically, you can generally guess that the majority of seeds you'll run into are typically going to be the minimum level of complexity, right? So that, it's funny because a lot of us rely on what level we're on, trying to get to see like when this final thing is, and then we get shocked Pikachu face when it is a bit higher. So there's a kind of a better way to do this, all right? And we don't have to necessarily rely on like the absolute number of the of the um, of the preset to make some decisions, and that's going to come into our confidence count here. So this is a bit of a newer concept. And this is a re-recording of this video. The first time I introduced this concept, I think we called it the vulnerability count, or like we've called it other things. Don't worry about it. The current term is the confidence count because that more accurately reflects what it is. So if we look at this here, because you're like, what the hell is the confidence count? It's a method to gain insight about the seed that's easier to keep track of and provides greater benefits. And we're going to look through all those, right? So just stay with me, okay? So first and foremost, it's a count. How do we do this count, right? I'm glad you asked. So we're going to add 1 to our confidence count when we obtain a progression relic that doesn't increase progression in the moment, all right? So for instance here, let's say in this example here, right? So if we were to go in the second castle and the first thing we got was bat, and we didn't get the silver ring yet, and we didn't get echo of bat yet, strictly in logic, because we would have already had a transformation in lycanthrope, this would add 1 to your confidence count. We love the fact that we got bat. Bat's the best relic in the game by far, right? But it didn't add to our progression in the moment. It will, or at least echo will, later on when we find it. But in that moment, bat did not add to our progression. So we would add it to our confidence counter, right? We're going to do that every time. Okay, so now we know how to add 1. And there's another way to add 1, and that is when you obtain a progression relic on the same level you already obtained a progression relic, whether it was useful or not. So in this example, we got Leapstone, and then we got Jewel of Open, and then we went into the caverns. And let's say we go and we fight Scylla, all right? And Scylla has the gravity boots, all right? That increases our progression at that time, right? Because that enables us now to fly, all right? And let's say we decide to keep going in the caverns, and we go to the Holy Symbol check, and what do you know? Holy Symbol, it's in its vanilla location. Holy Symbol does increase our progression, because now I can go and spawn the boatman or the ferryman, I can't remember the name, and check the merman statue check, and then we can get the holy symbol from there. I get it mixed up. My apologies, but you know what I mean, right? So they both increased our progression, but we're going to add one to our count because we got two relics that increase progression on the same level, right? So we can do that immediately. Okay, so that's how we increase this count, all right? So what are we counting towards, right? So the maximum confidence count is the number of potential steps above the minimum, all right? So above the minimum complexity, plus any levels that must have two progression relics or items. Okay, and then I gave the bat and echo example here. Pause it if you need to. So looking at this chart, what does this all mean? So this progression column is always only going to have one relic in it. Whatever the first relic is that we get on that level that provides progression, it's going to go over here. If we get additional relics that are progression relics, or let's say we got, I don't know, again, this is like bad example, right? We didn't get silver ring yet, we don't have echo yet, but we obtained bat. We know bat can give progression, but it isn't giving us progression in the moment, right? Because we already have a transformation and we already have flight and we don't have echo. So in logic, this is doing nothing for us in the moment. We would shift it over here to this confidence area, and then we would go forward later and find silver ring. Silver ring is going to give us progression because in this relic thing over here that I'm using for Vlad's, I've also underlined the R, and the R stands for ring, all right? So I'm going to put it over here. So this last column over here is just to put our Vlad relics in when we get them, and also to put the random ring in there, okay? I know it could be Vlad relic, I just couldn't fit in with the space, sue me, all right? And then if we kept going in the second castle, we could then say, okay, well, now I've got echo, and now I'm going to add that to the confidence count, because echo, after we've obtained bat, is progression. But we've already counted for progression on level 5, so we're going to put it over here, okay? That's how this bedwar works. So the maximum confidence is the number of steps above the minimum, all right? In this case, that is 2, all right? Plus any levels that have 2 progression, or that must have 2 progression relics or items, all right? So in this case, again, if we go like this here, right? We do this, like that, and let's say we also do this and like that, all right? So what it means by having 2 is that bat can't fit anywhere else here. It has to go in confidence. We could do this, but then like Leap Stone would be, or Gravity Boots would be over here because we already solved for flight, all right? So it doesn't matter, all right? So either way we slice it, the maximum confidence count is 3. In this case, if we actually had a seed that had 10 complexity, which is extremely unlikely, we'd only have 1 confidence count, we'd keep going. In the example we showed though, our confidence count was 3. And it's just a mathematical thing here, right? It can't physically go beyond 3. We'll talk about the power things in a moment. But typically it can't go beyond 3, all right? Oh yeah, I do talk about this in the next one here. So Power of Mist and Power of Wolf are sometimes in logic. Now in Lycanthrope, it's never a logical thing to grab Power of Wolf because you start with it. So this is a good example. Let's say that Power of Mist was our flight, then we need to add, like this would then go into this chart. There would be one thing that would go over into the confidence count, and then our maximum would be 4, all right? So we need to take that into account when we're dealing with Power of Mist seeds, all right? So we just talked about what it is, how to count for it, what the maximum is, and the when we have to increase the maximum, right? So why are we bothering with all this, all right? Well, first and foremost, if we take the soft count, which is the number of progression relics we have, right? And then we minus the confidence count, it equals the hard count. So first and foremost, we can always get a hard count if we understand what the confidence count is, and it's much easier to keep track of that in our minds, all right? So that's the first benefit. we can just easily do what people normally set out to do with lower numbers, less things to keep track of. We need to have a good understanding of logic to keep this confidence thing in our minds, especially if we go out of logic, but it's much more doable than trying to hard count this thing, keeping track of everything, all right? Like trying to build this exact chart in your head is incredibly challenging, especially when you're racing. Maybe you can do it as a spectator, but you've got a million things going in your head as a racer, all right? So that's the first benefit. Now let's look at some others, all right? So this is going to be decision making, taking all things into consideration, hard count, soft count, like your confidence. But generally, you can just rely on your whatchamacallit, your confidence count, because that's the only one that really matters. Because you can get the rest of the counts from your tracker, because that's always going to keep in mind your soft count, and then you just minus your confidence count to get that, all right? So how does this impact decision making? First and foremost, do I need to return to the first castle? If I'm in the second castle and my count, hard or soft, is lower than the minimum, like well lower, like it's not step 7 and we're looking to get the ring and be done, right? If I am on 6, I know I have to go back. Minus shenanigans with like Akmadon, for instance. If you don't have a transformation, that's usually a very safe situation, like safe preset. But notwithstanding that, then you know you must go back. If you are on the 4th rung of this Donkey Kong area here, like in this example, right? You've got the 4th thing. You know that you can't get enough. There's only like one more layer in the second castle, again, minus Akmadon, which is usually another thing, right? So you know you must go back, all right? So do I need to return? Yes, no. You can make that determination, all right? Then you can also say, when do I go back to the first castle? So this is an interesting thing here, all right? So let's do this example in Lycanthrope, right? So I'm in the second castle. At the point when we get Holy Glasses and we decide to go and free Richter from Shaft, our confidence count is 1, all right? There are 2 more things that could be on the same layer as something else. And the confidence count is exceptionally good in in particular, the second castle, and in like the caverns and mines if it's all opened up with flight and stuff like that, because those are the areas with the most checks in them, with potentially the same progression stuff. All right, we can actually look at the next page. You may have seen this before if you've been to other videos, but this is the multi-relic chance. All right, based on number of checks opened by progression. All right. So when we have no relics, there's 5 things, all right? When we go to the second castle, there are 9 things. So it's literally doubled with a transformation, right? So you're like twice as likely to find additional goodies in the second castle than you were when you started the game on the same level, right? And then Jewel opens a bunch of things up, right? Especially the if you've already got Flight, and then more if you've already got Merman beforehand, right? So the place that you're most likely to encounter multiple relics on the same level is the second castle opened by the Holy Glasses, right? So we can take that and say, okay, well, if my confidence is relatively low, right, like 1 of 3, right, it's likely that something else might be here, right? Especially if you already have the Jewel of Open and you full clear that, right? Because the rest of these remaining checks here are like one-off kind of checks, and they're not going to bear a bunch of fruit, or they will bear fruit, sorry, but they're not going to. You're not going to get 2 things from like I don't know, like from Merman statue, right? Like if that's your deal, like here, then you're not going to get more things over here, right? It's going to be fairly linear. Well, I guess Mist has potential for 2, but you know what I mean, right? There's potential for more things, right? So what it does for you is you can make an educated guess. And remember, these are all guesses. We can only use the available information as best as we can, but it's a randomizer at the end of the day, right? But you can make an educated guess to ask yourself 2 things. Am I leaving things behind that I might need in terms of progression? Or is this thing bait? Am I going to go back to the first castle with, let's say, the ring, and it turns out to be no good, right? Now, of course, I know we can do spike room shenanigans, and maybe we didn't need to ban all that stuff, right? But like, this is just one situation of many. You could replace bat with mist, right? We actually had a seed recently where we got Jewel of Open in the second castle, and I knew I was making a mistake, and I shouldn't have done it. But our confidence count was like 0, right? But we get the Jewel, and the Jewel is very tempting to go back with because it allows for 2 out of logic checks if you have other things, right? Silver Ring and Spike Breaker. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go back, right? But it turns out I actually missed the progression ring, the silver ring in this case, right? Now, it ended up not being leading to progression per se, but it did end up leading to a random Vlad. So everyone like made the same mistake. And we could have easily just stayed in the second castle, knowing that A, there were obviously more random Vlads to be found, and that the confidence count was so low. And you would gain a significant tempo on your colleagues if you're able to figure that out in the moment and then execute on it. It can be challenging. It can it can feel bad to not do things sometimes, but do it a couple times. And when you feel bad, okay, try it the other way, right? Get a sense of comfort. Again, you'll find out what works for you. So the confidence count allows us to potentially avoid bait and can be a good guide for how long we stay. Or if the confidence count is already 3, right? Like in Lycanthrope's case, so that's the maximum, and we get a thing in the second castle, and we know that our hard count is less than the minimum, even if we were to get one more if it was the last Vlad, then we know we can just bounce to first right away. Like we need to go back anyways, right? We might as well. You could stay in second castle with a strategy where we're going to find more relics, but in this case here, when we obtain all the relics early, you would hard know you could go back. You wouldn't even need to worry about trying to find a teleporter at death or something like that. You could just go back immediately, especially with the library card. All right, so that's how this bad boy works. So it also helps us to say, can I chase complexity? How likely is X to be bait? We just talked about it a little bit, but more importantly, how linear is the rest of the seed? So at this point here, when the confidence counts at its max, the remainder of the seed must be linear. All right? These tools must lead to one more tool in logic, and only one more. And then that will lead to only one more tool. And then only one more tool being the final Vlad, which opens up the Dracula fight, right? So in this specific case, if we knew everything here, and we got missed, and the seed is linear, and we got missed on the 6th spot, then we know that there must be one more thing to get to the end. And if we didn't have Spike Breaker and the seed is linear, everything must be used at that point. So we can then say I'm going to balance on the library, and I'm going to go to Silver Ring, and I'm going to save myself several minutes. You can absolutely know that through all of this. And all you really need to know is this confidence count that you can use to infer everything else. You'll have all the tools available in front of you, especially use the tracker. All right. Okay, and then that kind of gets into guaranteed checks, and we just talked about that. Sometimes you can infer that these things won't be random Vlads, like in this case here. I know Spikebreaker must be in the library, therefore it must not be a random Vlad. Therefore I can skip it. I can just keep going, right? It can also help us to skip areas for the time being, and this can be very fruitful. One of my favorite plays is to skip library early when I get a progression item before having to go to the library. I've made some videos on that. There's the 310 video I think is very good on what you do with early Leapstone and how you play that. Alternatively, there's a video in the Lycanthrope series called the Librarian's Gambit, which you can make an inferred decision saying that I've done, let's say in that case, if you're on the outer wall, I've done 3 of 5 of these checks. How likely is that the other 2 are going to have something else? Whereas all these other areas are much bigger. And of course it can, but the odds aren't there, right? So you'd be willing to bet on it, and you're going to lose occasionally, right? But when we're trying to make the best decisions in the moment based on the information we have, and it's a randomizer, you need to accept that you're going to lose sometimes, right? That's just how it is. but ultimately you'll be pushing your win percentage higher. And I don't mean that by necessarily winning or losing races, but just like winning or losing like decisions. Okay, so check out Rando 310 for a good case study on that, and that will help to better explain how this, or to further explain how decision making can work here with good logic understanding. All right. So again, counts matter most when you have 4 Vlads, coupled with a strong understanding of logic, especially if you also have the random ring, so you can confidently skip things. And the biggest thing is that this is a tool and not a solution, right? So we've got a box of tools, and it has 2 tools in it. It's got a hammer and it's got a saw. Logic is the hammer. We're always going to use logic. It's always very good. Hammers are fun. Sometimes we need the saw, right? Sometimes we don't, but it's available to us, and that's why we care. Okay, awesome. Let's keep her going here. Okay, so we've gone through this. So and yeah, here's a good example of how we can. Actually, no, let me rephrase. There are situations where you can very quickly infer a high confidence count. And in particular, that's like situations like early battle, right? So in this lycanthrope situation here, we've got bat early. So what does bat solve for? It doesn't solve for transformations because we already have one in lycanthrope, but it does solve for flight. Flight is generally assumed to be solved by leapstone and gravity boots, all right? So we know that leapstone and gravity boots will be somewhere in this pillar because when we collect them, they will not give us progression in the moment because bat has already solved for it. That means that our confidence count immediately upon getting early bat before getting either of these relics is 2. So it tells us very early that the seed is linear, right? And we can absolutely use that to our advantage. Again, second castle is the most likely place, but yeah, you just know right away that it's linear, and you can be a bit more aggressive with your decision making. And then here's the deal with Power of Wolf or Mist. This is on a safer scavenger seed, and you can see in this case that that this is the confidence count here is 5 when we work with the minimum, right? And of course, this can always go above the minimum, but if you've got 2 of 3, then you can say, okay, well, I'm fairly confident in how this seed's going to go, right? You're not guaranteeing anything. That's why it's called confidence, not like a ironclad deal, right? So again, use that. You always use it with a sense of caution to an extent, but you can confidently use a high confidence count as long as you've done it properly. All right, awesome. We're going to quickly talk about this for a second. So it can be difficult to keep numbers going in your head when you're racing and there's a lot of things going in your head, right? The easiest thing I do is I take this pen, and when I know that the confidence count has gone up, I just make a little tick mark on my page, all right? And then when I've got 3 tick marks, I know that the seed must be linear as long as I've done it correctly. And I have made mistakes, of course, but you get better with practice, all right? Just like most things in life. So the problem can become when you are going out of logic to keep track of all these things, right? So I don't think you should do this, but I'm going to share anyways, just in case you're interested and you just want to know what I do. But I only really do this in tournament races. I don't do this casually. But is to make notations on a piece of paper that looks like this, all right? So what this means is when I get something, like let's say I get Leapstone at Cube of Zoe, right? That increases my the complexity count. I'm going to make a check or a tick mark beside count. And I'm going to continue to do that as its situation unfolds. And then as I get things that increase the confidence count, I'm going to do the same thing. But I'm going to do that below the confidence count with a good amount of space between count and confidence, right? And the reason I'm doing that is because sometimes I'll obtain things outside of logic, right? Like SP for like spike. You can use whatever you want, right? The fewer letters you use, the better, because you're trying to play the game and use a pen at the same time is challenging, right? So if I don't know what it is at the time because I don't understand the logic chain, I'm going to write it in the middle. And then when I do understand how that played out, I can make a check mark or a tick mark above or below it very easily. That's been my most efficient way to do it. I don't build this. This is too much to build. I have not found a good use case for building this entire chart here. In the middle of a race, there's just too much going on. You won't be able to do it. I've found that I've had success with this. Again, I have made mistakes with it, but I'm getting better with it now, and I find it's useful. And again, I only do it in tournament races. I don't do it casually. All right. The rest of this is just examples of every preset. because it helps you to understand the minimum and the maximum and what like the confidence count is here, right? So safe scavenger, the difference between the minimum and the maximum is 2, and bat has to be here somewhere, at least in this example, and we could trade bat for other things, and it wouldn't matter. There'd still always be sun here on the side, regardless of our max. Again, this is going to be in the description. You can play with this file and figure it out too, and call it my mistakes if I've made them. But I can safely say that safe has a confidence count maximum of 3, because the gap between minimum and maximum is 2, and then there's one that has to be on the side here, right? So it's 3 for safe and scavenger, it's 3 for lycanthrope, it's 2 for nimble, all right? Because there's nothing that has to go in the confidence count side of nimble. It can just go straight 8 with nothing else. The for rat race is 4, is essentially safe, but it adds an extra layer. Warlock is also 4, just because the minimum and maximum gap here. The is a thing. The adventure and expedition are really interesting here. So, and interesting in that like they're really tough to use this in, right? So like the gap between minimum and max in adventure is 4, and then there's going to be one thing that goes into confidence for sure. Expedition's a bit different because it starts with bat. So it's the same amount of relics here, but the problem is that the minimum in expedition is 8 rather than 9, so your confidence count gap is still 5. So like it gives you information, but I think that I haven't played a lot of adventure and expedition, it's just me, but I think that the wider or the larger that the minimum or the maximum confidence count can be, the less useful it kind of becomes and probably harder to track. Because like think about the maximum in this could be 7 if these were both required, which is exceptionally not needed or not likely. Also, I put this gem here just to signify the rat race one, just in case you're wondering. It wasn't to signify the shopkeeper, if that's what you're wondering about. I put the minimum and maximums for speedrunning glitch for just the the minimums for complexity. These are not the confidence counts, but and I wasn't gonna figure this out because these speedruns are crazy, right? Anyways, lastly here, if you want to do this yourself and figure it out, this sheet's available on Google Sheets, all right? And if I actually move my camera for a second, or just this, you can see I've actually put some stuff in here on the side so that you can get some cheats as to what this is, what these things are when it's not obvious. But you go to SotN.io, you generate a seed, you specifically don't generate it in tournament mode, all right? You play through the seed, and then you can, and then you also show relic locations here, right? After playing through the seed, you can, or if you just want to like understand how this works and you don't even play through the seed, you can copy and paste what it outputs into here, right? And the reason you're going to do that is I've lined up these relics essentially beside where they always will be, all right? So Soul of Bat will always be the first relic location that the randomizer delivers within this list here, right? And then what you can do is say, okay, Soul of Bat at Trio. Okay, I'm going to move this to Trio. Then you do that with the rest of them, right? And then once you have that, you can then drag them over to the levels to say like where they were, right? And to follow along with the seed, right? So you'd grab everything in the first level first, and you'd say, okay, here's what I have, and then I'm going to grab everything that the first level enabled me to do to complete second, and so on and so forth, right? Just like the Donkey Kong example. We're going to go the full length of the girder before we increase the level, okay? So this can help you with practice and all that kind of stuff there, all right? But other than that, we've been at this for almost 35 minutes now, so that's probably it. That's all the insights I have to share with you. So there's a lot of cool things we can do with complexity counting. I think confidence counting is the way to go. And again, whether we called it the vulnerability count, or I think I called it the reverse count for a bit, it doesn't matter. I like the idea of calling it confidence because as the number increases, so does your confidence that you're not going to get baited and all that kind of stuff, okay? So just as always, check out the comments for anything I've missed, mistakes, all that jazz. Add a comment if I've made a mistake or if you just have additional insights to put in there. And a Google Sheet link for this is going to be available in on the in the description. Okay. Hopefully, it's been helpful. If it's challenging, it's because it is. Like this stuff is hard. And again, just focus on other things first. If you're still figuring out movement, if you can't do the spike room in the dark, you should probably figure that out first. But once you've done that, you can come back to this, figure it out, and it's such a beautiful tool. The thing I love most about the SotN randomizer is that it always pushes you harder. There's not a moment in the game where you can't be doing something either like in your mind to figure things out or mechanically with your hands to go faster. There is no hold right and win, right? This is not Sonic the Hedgehog, right? You got to be backdashing, you got to be doing it with pace, all that kind of stuff, right? So that being said, that's the end of this one. I hope you found it really useful. And yeah, we'll see you in the next one and throughout the series, all right? Cheers. Take care.